All right, so you're here because you want those core insights right. Like the stuff that can really shift how you see things without getting lost in the weeds. You want those aha moments, but you want them in a way that respects your time. And that's what we're going for today.
Absolutely. We are diving deep into the teachings of Neville Goddard. We're going to be looking specifically at notes taken from his lectures by Margaret Ruth Broom. These were compiled and published as The Miracle of Imagination.
And just a quick note, these notes are not verbatim transcripts of Goddard's lectures.
Right.
It's more like Broom's record of what she absorbed from these lectures over 7 years of attending.
7 years, wow.
Yeah. So think of it as like a direct line to the power of his ideas about the mind.
Yeah. And what we want to do today is extract the real key wisdom from all this work, focusing specifically on his central belief that consciousness is the only reality, and then exploring the practical techniques he gave for manifesting your desires in the world. So yeah, get ready for some mind-blowing stuff, potentially.
Yeah. I'm excited. Okay, so who was Neville Goddard? It sounds like his life was quite a journey.
It was a fascinating one. He was born on February 19th, 1905 in Barbados.
Okay.
He was the fourth of 10 children, 9 boys and 1 girl.
9 brothers. Wow.
I know. Imagine that.
That's a full house.
Yeah.
Do the notes give a sense of what his early life was like?
Yeah, they do. And actually, there's a really cool story about his name. Before he was even born, a voice told his uncle very distinctly that the baby should be named Neville.
Right.
And when the uncle told Neville's mother, she said, "Oh, we know, we plan to call him that."
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a pretty striking start, right?
Yeah.
Like it hints at something beyond the ordinary.
Definitely.
So Goddard's life was marked with a sense of destiny right from the beginning. And that's something we see throughout his teachings.
Wow. So powerful way to begin life. What about his family background then?
Well, materially they were poor, but the notes really emphasize that they were very rich in love. His mother was the disciplinarian, his father was a businessman, and Neville himself, he often shared anecdotes from his childhood. One that's particularly memorable is this one about an old woman who lived on the sand dunes.
Okay.
And she was said to have prophetic abilities, and she apparently predicted the futures of several of his brothers. And she told his parents to leave Neville alone, that he belonged to God.
He belonged to God.
Yeah, that's quite a statement.
That's a huge statement.
Yeah.
About a child. It does sound like he was a unique character even as a child.
And the notes mention some humorous stories as well.
Yeah, they do. There's a couple of stories that really give you a sense of his personality. He apparently used to pay a friend to laugh out loud during the saddest parts of movies.
What?
Yeah, and he'd make sure that his friend would miss the ending.
No way.
I know, right?
Wow.
And then there's another story about him paying for a donkey ride, but with the promise that he would make the donkey move.
Okay.
So these little glimpses, they show a mind that's always working in unusual ways. Yeah. Yeah, definitely thinking outside of the box. What about his education? Was there anything interesting there?
Well, there was an incident in his early schooling involving a Bible verse.
Okay.
He was reciting, "Take up thy bed and walk." But his teacher insisted that it was "take up thy couch and walk."
Oh.
And because they only had one Bible in the family and another brother had taken it to school, Neville couldn't prove his version. And the teacher's response was very harsh. He made him take off his shirt and trousers and beat him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he ended up being moved to a different school. And it sounds like an experience that might have, contributed to his questioning of authority later on and literal interpretations.
Yeah. So it was like a pretty tough experience.
Yeah.
What did he do after he finished school?
Well, he finished high school at 17 and worked briefly for like $13 a week, but quickly became disillusioned with that and, famously declared that he would only work for himself from that day forward. And that's exactly what he did.
Wow.
Yeah. Very independent spirit early on.
Yeah. That's a bold move for a young man. The notes mention a career in dancing.
Yeah. So believing that he could do what he saw others doing on stage, he joined an established dancer and began a professional career.
Okay.
Got married during this time, had a son, and then in 1925, he and his dancing partner sailed for England.
Oh, wow.
And traveled quite a bit. And it was in England that he was introduced to psychical research.
Okay.
Which really sparked his interest in something beyond the physical. So a clear shift from the physical world of dance to something a bit more unseen.
Yeah, some more metaphysical.
Exactly.
Okay.
And after returning to America in 26, his interest in mysticism deepened. His passion for theater kind of waned, and the Great Depression in 1929, which led to the closure of many theaters, effectively ended his dancing career.
Okay.
So this period seems to have been a turning point, pushing him further, exploring this inner world.
It definitely seems like a pivotal period, for his intellectual development. And then there's the mention of the Rosicrucian Society and this key figure, Abdullah.
Yeah, absolutely crucial. So during this time, he becomes interested in the Rosicrucian Society, and he meets this Ethiopian rabbi named Abdullah, who had a really profound and lasting influence on his life.
Okay.
Abdullah had considered actually becoming a Catholic priest,
Okay.
but his wealthy father talked him out of it. Initially, Neville was resistant to attending Abdullah's classes because he found another young attendee too flamboyant.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but he ran out of excuses one day and went.
Oh.
And upon dismissal, Abdullah walked right up to Neville, took his hand, and said, "Where have you been? You are 3 months late."
3 months late. That's a very direct greeting.
It is.
What was his reaction?
Well, he was totally surprised, and he asked Abdullah, "How did you know I was coming?" And Abdullah simply replied, "The brothers told me."
Wow.
So under Abdullah's guidance, Neville really delved into the Kabbalah, which is a form of Jewish mysticism,
All right.
and gained some really profound insights into the Bible. Abdullah taught him how to use what he called the law of consciousness, to see the Bible not as literal history, but psychologically.
Okay. So to see the world as a projection of our inner state. And this mentorship really cemented Neville's belief in the power of his own mind.
Wow. So Abdullah was really instrumental then in laying this groundwork for his core teachings.
He really was. He was pivotal.
Okay. So what happened after this period of study with Abdullah?
Well, in February 1930, Neville started lecturing in New York City.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he began in a small room with just a handful of people, but as his speaking skills grew and his message became more confident and clear, his audience steadily increased. His first marriage ended, and he was single for several years, and then a young designer in his audience declared to herself that she would marry him.
Oh, wow.
And when they met after the lecture, Neville had the same exact thought.
Really?
Yeah. And they did indeed marry and had a loving relationship, and their daughter was born in 1943. So this personal experience seemed to really mirror his growing understanding of the power of intention in shaping reality.
So it's like his personal life is starting to reflect this understanding as well.
Yeah. And then there's a move to the West Coast.
Yes.
No.
After the war, Neville traveled and lectured in major cities, including San Francisco, and in 1955, he felt it was time to leave New York City. He had hoped to settle in San Francisco, a city that he really loved, but he realized that his most important work was meant to be in Los Angeles.
Oh, okay.
So he moved his family there in 55, although they made return trips to New York.
Okay.
And it's interesting to note that the notes mention in the early 50s, he actually had his own television program and made 2 phonograph records, which are now available on cassette. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Reaching a pretty big audience for the time.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And it sounds like his lectures continued to draw crowds.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Big time. He taught the law of consciousness at the Fox Wilshire Theater in Los Angeles. This was on Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
And he had such large numbers that people would have to stand outside.
Oh, wow.
Unable to get a seat.
That's a lot of people.
And he also spent several weeks each year lecturing in San Francisco. So clearly there was a strong following on both coasts.
Now, there's a specific event mentioned in San Francisco in 1959. That sounds pretty significant. Something about an awakening in a tomb. That sounds pretty dramatic.
It was a huge turning point for him. So on July 20th, 1959, in San Francisco, yours, Neville had what he described as an awakening. He found himself sealed in a tomb, and upon rummaging a stone, he emerged from his skull, like a child emerging from the womb.
Oh, man.
And this profound experience fundamentally changed his lectures.
So this is more than just like an intellectual understanding. It's like a direct experience.
A direct transformative experience. And from that point forward, having awakened from what he called the dream of life, his perspective shifted entirely.
Yeah.
He realized that his physical form was simply a covering for his true immortal being, who he identified as God the Father.
Okay.
And from that point, he had this deep and urgent need to share this understanding. To emphasize that, everyone listening was also far greater and more powerful than they could ever imagine, his message took on a much deeper spiritual dimension.
Sounds like his message was deeply rooted in our divine nature then. So how did his work continue then until his passing?
Well, from that day in 59 until his departure on October 1st, 1972, Neville continued to lecture, much like the Apostle Paul, speaking about the kingdom of God, trying to convince others about Jesus, drawing on the law of Moses and the prophets, but always with his own very unique psychological interpretation. As the Bible says, some believed what he said and others did not.
Yeah.
A remarkable life dedicated to sharing his understanding.
It sounds like a remarkable life journey that really shaped his teachings. Let's dive into those core principles then. The first one here is consciousness is the only reality. That's a pretty fundamental concept to get a grasp on.
It is. It's the absolute cornerstone of his entire philosophy. Goddard states very clearly that the Bible is not a literal historical account, but rather an allegorical picture lesson designed to convey fundamental psychological principles. He emphasizes that the figures we read about are not people, but personifications of aspects of our own consciousness.
Oh.
And we've mistaken them for actual individuals, and their allegorical lessons have been misinterpreted as historical events. And he uses the analogy of a grain of corn to illustrate this. The outer form we see is very different from the life germ within which is the true substance and potential, so we need to look beyond the surface narrative.
So it's like we need to look beyond the surface of the Bible almost and find that deeper psychological truth.
Exactly. And he explains that his focus in these lectures will be on those embedded psychological truths, which he notes are often linked to what he calls phallic and solar allegories.
Okay.
Now, he acknowledges that the ancient storytellers, they had a more limited understanding of anatomy and the cosmos compared to modern science, and they used these symbols to represent creative power within the individual.
Right.
So it's about understanding the language they use to point to these inner realities.
And how does this concept of the name, so Joduviu, Ichi, how does that fit into this understanding of consciousness?
Well, Goddard explains that Jotevau, Ichi, often referred to as the tetragrammaton, represents consciousness as the means by which all things are made. It's the power that allows us to nail or bind anything to our consciousness. And he breaks it down in a really interesting way.
Okay.
JOD relates to conception, the initial thought, the idea you have. He then represents incubation, the feeling, the energy you put behind that thought.
Okay.
VAU is the power of persisting in your imaginal act, holding on to that feeling. And the final HE represents the visible, objective world that's molded by your consciousness. So it's like a blueprint for how our inner world manifests outwardly.
So our thoughts and feelings, when sustained in our imagination, literally shape the reality we experience.
That's the core message. And he really emphasizes that we've been given dominion over our world and that our consciousness is God, the one and only reality. And we inherently possess the ability to feel and to own every desire of our hearts. The actual manifestation often occurs in ways our 3D rational mind just can't understand.
Right.
It happens on a different level of reality.
Okay, and prayer then is not about beseeching some external deity, but something far more internal and personal.
Exactly. Goddard defines prayer as the very secret of change. It's the key that unlocks a dimensionally larger world. A prayer that is granted is not a favor from outside, but rather it signifies an action resulting from a change in your own consciousness. And he really underscores that it's our attitudes, not just our actions, that bring about our circumstances. Our actions and experiences are reflections of who we believe we are at our core.
So if we want to change our circumstances, then we need to fundamentally change who we believe we are.
Absolutely. He says that having a different concept of self will naturally lead to different actions and therefore different experiences. By assuming the feeling of our wish being fulfilled, by truly embodying that state in our imagination, we're altering the trajectory of our future. And he also cautions that even assumptions that are false, if held onto and sustained, they harden into fact.
Yeah.
That's the power of belief at work.
That's pretty powerful stuff. And he gives some practical techniques for manifestation. The first one mentioned is state akin to sleep. So, ESAT, how does that actually work?
Well, Goddard emphasizes that a state akin to sleep is really conducive to making an assumption, because our wide-awake mind often struggles to accept a state that our senses are telling us is not true.
Right.
He refers to the creation story of Adam and Eve, pointing out that God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam before creating Eve. And this, he says, sets the pattern for all future creation. The desired state is brought forth when the conscious mind is quietened. So feeling sleepy, even just saying to yourself, I am sleepy, can help to call forth these more receptive states. Just as Adam named the animals and then fell asleep, whatever mood or state of being we choose to experience and then fall asleep in has a tendency to objectify in our world.
So SASS is about harnessing that liminal state between wakefulness and sleep to impress our subconscious mind with the feeling of our wish fulfilled.
Exactly. He stresses that these Bible stories are not just ancient tales, they're about us, and they demonstrate techniques for changing our self-concept.
Right.
And when this inner shift truly takes place, our future inevitably changes because all events are realized within our own individual minds first.
Right.
SATs helps us access that inner realm more effectively.
And then he delves into specific Bible stories as illustrations, starting with Jacob wrestling with an angel. Now, that's a familiar story, but I'm guessing Goddard has a pretty unique interpretation of it.
Oh, he does.
Okay.
He explains that Jacob, whose name means the supplanter, represents our deep desire to transform ourselves into something that our reason and our senses deny.
Okay.
The angel isn't necessarily a being, but rather a messenger from God. And we've already discussed for Goddard, consciousness is God. So the angel actually represents an idea or a desire that we hold within our consciousness. The wrestling is our inner struggle with that desire, because often we don't believe that we already are or can become that which we are contemplating.
Yeah.
It's the battle between our limitations and our potential.
So this story illustrates then the crucial step of wrestling with our disbelief in order to fully embody that feeling of our desired outcome.
Exactly.
Okay. And what about the detail about Jacob's thigh being put out of joint and then avoiding eating the sinew of the thigh? What's the meaning there?
Well, Goddard points out that the word thigh in Strong's Concordance actually refers to the soft generative parts that hang upon the thigh of a man.
Okay.
He suggests that these kinds of phallic symbols were used to convey deeper truths about creation. So the wrestling continues until something goes out of Jacob and he says, "Who touched me? For I perceive virtue has gone out of me." And Goddard interprets this as paralleling the feeling we have after meditation or focused imaginal work, where you feel a sense of completion and a temporary inability to continue.
Yeah.
Just as physical creation leads to a cessation of the act, successfully becoming conscious of our wish fulfilled can end the hunger for it. The shrinking of the sinew mirrors the completion of the act of physical creation. The desire subsides once it's realized in consciousness. It's a really fascinating connection between the physical and the psychological.
Yeah, that's definitely a different way of looking at that. So he also interprets Isaac blessing Jacob.
Yeah.
What's the key insight there for us?
The story of Isaac, who is old and blind, blessing Jacob instead of his first son Esau, really highlights the importance of feeling as opposed to relying on our senses.
Okay.
Isaac, sensing that his death is near, asks his first son Esau, who's described as rough and hairy, to go and hunt and bring him venison,
Okay.
so that he can bless him before he dies. However, Jacob, who is smooth-skinned, overhears this plan, and with the help of his mother, he cleverly disguises himself by covering his arms and neck with the hairy skins of a young goat.
Okay.
And he deceives his blind father
Uh-huh.
into believing that he is Esau, and he receives the blessing. So the blindness of Isaac is key here.
So the blindness of Isaac is significant then. It's not just a random detail.
It's absolutely central.
Okay.
It emphasizes the idea of relying on inner feeling
Okay.
rather than objective sensory perception. Isaac even says, "Come close, my son, that I may touch you. I cannot see, but come that I may feel you." And even after touching Jacob, he's still a bit uncertain. He says, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." Yet because he feels the hairiness that he associates with Esau, he ultimately gives the blessing to Jacob.
Wow.
And as soon as it's given, it can't be taken back. Jacob quickly leaves. The real Esau returns. And so we see this play out.
So Jacob impersonating Esau to receive the blessing is about our subjective desire. So Jacob essentially becoming our objective reality, so Esau, through this act of assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled.
Precisely. Goddard emphasizes that in our limited state of awareness, only one state of consciousness can truly occupy our reality at a time.
Right.
And he encourages us to re-enter the drama, to bless our second son, our deep desire, and walk in the consciousness of being it,
Okay.
of having it already. When we do that, our environment will change.
Interesting.
So embody the feeling despite current sensory evidence.
The next biblical illustration is Moses on Mount Nebo. How does this story relate to the techniques of manifestation that we've been discussing?
Well, the story of Moses going up to the peak of Mount Nebo before his death offers a very detailed and symbolic technique for manifestation. Goddard explains that Moses, whose name means to draw out, personifies our own power of awareness, so our I am. Moab, the land from which he ascends, means mother, father, and represents our fundamental consciousness, or I-am-ness itself. Nebo, the mountain peak, means prophecy. An image of the mind symbolizes our desire, often something that appears distant or unattainable like a high mountain.
Right.
Pisgah, the slope from which Moses views the promised land, means to contemplate. Jericho, the city he sees, means fragrant odor, represents the joy and satisfaction of our wish fulfilled.
Okay.
Gilead, the region he surveys, means the hills of witness, signifying the world around us that will reflect our assumed state. And then finally, Dan, one of the tribes, meaning the prophet, represents the fulfillment of our prophecy or our desire. So it's a step-by-step internal process.
So it's a mental journey then, a step-by-step process using these locations.
Exactly. We define our objective, so that's our Mount Nebo, the seemingly impossible desire.
Okay.
And then we spend time in contemplation on Pisgah, imagining feeling what it would be like to already possess it until we experience the joy of Jericho, that fragrant odor of fulfillment.
Right.
Then we release the need to figure out how to force things externally, and we trust that the world, Gilead, will reflect our state, and our desire, Nebo, will manifest. And Goddard also touches on the death of the old self. So, when we become wealthy, where is the memory of the poor us buried?
Right.
Where does that go? When we're healthy, where does the sick us go?
Right.
It's within our own consciousness, having died to that old concept of self.
Okay.
And just as Moses's burial place was unknown, the old self fades away without us needing to track its demise.
Okay. And the age of Moses at his death, 120.
Mm-hmm.
That also has a symbolic meaning in this context.
It does. The number 120, so 1 + 2 + 0 = 3, is seen as a numerical symbol of expression. At 120 years old, Moses is expressing a new state.
Right.
He's leaving behind the old and looking towards the promised land.
That's right.
Similarly, we transform by consciously assuming the feeling of already expressing our desired state. This new assumption is new wine that can't be contained in the old bottles.
Yeah.
It just won't work. So we don't need any external assistance. We ourselves bury the old us by shifting our awareness. We shouldn't look back, and we don't need to obsess about how it's going to happen in the external world.
Right.
We just remain faithful to the new concept of self, and the old reality fades away. So there's a simple formula here.
So he boils it down to a formula based on this story.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
First, you define your objective.
Yeah.
So that's Nebo. Second, you construct a simple, natural event in your imagination that implies fulfillment.
Right.
And you place yourself as the central participant.
Third, you get your body into a relaxed state akin to sleep, SAS. And fourth, you mentally immerse yourself in that action right now in the present moment, feeling all the sensations as if they are real. Don't just observe, fully participate. So he gives an example. If you desire a promotion, don't just imagine the promotion. Imagine a close colleague warmly congratulating you and feel that sincerity of that handshake.
Right.
Or if the natural next step after your desire would be climbing stairs to your new office, then focus on the feeling of your feet on each step, that exertion, the view from the top.
Okay.
The key is to maintain this feeling with the least amount of effort.
Right.
That drowsy state helps. And repeating a short affirmative phrase like thank you or it is done in this relaxed state can be incredibly powerful. This relieves you of the mental burden of figuring out how, because your dimensionally larger self will orchestrate the means, often in ways you can't even predict.
And the idea of contemplation, of like losing yourself so completely in the feeling of the wish fulfilled that you're almost surprised or shocked when you return to reality.
Right.
That seems like a powerful element
Absolutely.
of this as well.
He emphasizes that. To feel you are what you want to be so completely that you lose awareness of your surroundings, the room, your body. That slight shock upon returning to your present awareness is a good indicator that you've successfully entered that state.
Okay.
And he also advises very strongly against discussing it
Okay.
with others and even with your own rational mind.
Right.
That limited logical mind can't comprehend how a purely felt state can become reality. What you feel you possess, you will possess. And often it manifests in ways your conscious mind could never devise. The final step is to go about your Father's business. Live your normal life holding on to that feeling, trusting those appropriated desires will unfold.
Okay, the next lesson kind of shifts focus slightly. Assumptions harden into facts. And it seems to be a reiteration, but it's illustrated through a different biblical example.
Right.
Pontius Pilate and Barabbas.
Yeah.
That one.
This lesson really powerfully reinforces the idea that these stories in the Bible are not about people in some distant past. They are happening within us.
Right.
And the story of Jesus standing before Pontius Pilate, where the crowd is given a choice to release Jesus or Barabbas, is interpreted by Goddard on a very psychological level.
Okay.
Pilate, as the judge, represents law, which is often blind.
Right.
Barabbas, whose name means father's son, but who is presented as a robber, symbolizes desire. And Goddard makes a crucial point here. Desire implies a confession of lack.
So the act of desiring something means we're acknowledging we don't have it.
Yeah.
That we're robbed of it, even though it's already ours potentially.
Exactly. And by dwelling in desire, we're actually denying our possession of it. Goddard says we must crucify ourselves onto the desire by claiming its fulfillment because we can't desire what we believe we already possess.
Yeah.
The Passover becomes a metaphor for transformation, releasing old patterns, Barabbas, to embody the desired state, Jesus. The crowd clamoring for the release of Barabbas represents the collective wise men who are unknowingly perpetuating limitation
Wow.
by clinging to lack
Yeah.
and crucifying our potential fulfillment.
Okay.
Goddard even suggests that if we identify with Jesus but still harbor unfulfilled ambitions, a sense of denial that unfulfilled ambition is our Barabbas, the obstacle.
Wow.
The crucifixion symbolizes our complete identification with and faithfulness to the desired state, which ultimately resurrects it in our world, unaided by any external forces. The stone being rolled away signifies that no external intervention is needed.
Right.
The transformative power resides within, and again, he references Jacob as the archetype.
Okay.
Just as Jacob supplanted Esau, we must supplant our old state of lack, Barabbas, with the new reality of fulfillment, Jesus.
Okay, so the practical exercise that he suggests of sitting quietly and taking on the roles of Pilate, the crowd, and the judge, this is a way to consciously enact this internal shift
Exactly.
of releasing Barabbas and embracing Jesus
Yeah.
within ourselves.
Yes. He recommends taking time to sit and consciously become Pilate the judge,
Okay.
conduct a trial of our desires and our lack. Then we become the crowd,
Okay.
the collective consciousness that's ready to release those old beliefs, Barabbas.
Right.
And finally, we step into the role of the judge and pronounce the release of Barabbas, our lack,
Right.
and assume the reality of our desired state. So Jesus crucified on Golgotha, the place of imagination.
Okay.
This sustained act of assumption hardens into fact.
Okay.
And just as we intuitively know when we've forgiven someone, we'll know when we've released our Barabbas.
That belief in lack.
Yes.
Okay. He also offers a psychological interpretation of the Garden of Gethsemane
Right.
and the betrayal of Jesus. What's the takeaway for us there?
Well, the Garden of Gethsemane is not a location, but rather the process of preparing our minds, surrounding ourselves with good influences, focusing on what's true, honest, just, pure, lovely, gracious.
Okay.
That's the garden. The encounter with the approaching crowd and Jesus' statement, "I am he," which causes them to fall back, is seen as a psychological drama.
Okay.
It illustrates the power of our self-affirmation,
Okay.
our declaration of who we are. Jesus' instruction, "If you seek me, let these go," followed by Judas' suicide, symbolizes consciousness detaching from an old state and refocusing on a new one. Mentally expressing and embodying the new state is taking your own life from the old.
Okay.
Both Judas, whose name means to praise, give thanks, explode with joy, and the mystery surrounding Moses' burial place signify the release of the old state.
Okay.
So we don't need external help to achieve objectives. It happens within.
The promise given to Joshua, and then the story of Jericho and Rahab, these seem to continue this theme of internal transformation leading to external change.
Absolutely. The promise given to Joshua,